how can we change the education systems? How can we use the new technologies in order to have more responsible and more conscious citizens in Europe, in the democratic world?
I think the issue of education is being overly diagnosed. I think people know some of the interventions that need to be made. I think the question really goes on political will to make them happen. And usually what happens is presidents think even in terms of 4 to 6 years. I mean, in democratic states. And it's very clear that without reform, it's going to be very, very hard to truly make interventions in the education system, to transform education to the levels that we need for that to change. There are 3 buckets that I think are very, very important to think about this, beyond policy making, and I can make a comment about that. The first one is the fact that we're living with a new generation that for the most part has a limited span of attention. They live the moment, they are all the time thinking in terms more digital terms. So the question is, are the education systems today, models, adjusted to these realities of these new generations? And I'll tell you, when you look at the United States with dropout rates of 30%, and you look at dropout rates of 50% on minorities, we have a crisis of major proportions in the United States. And I know Europe has some similar numbers that have to do, how do you motivate these new generations to think about education as the path to get a job and create jobs, which is very important. It's not only about getting a job, but how they create jobs themselves. So motivation, I think, is key, and technology there, and tomorrow I'm going to speak about this in more detail, can play a huge role in making immersive type of experiences happen, where the student is highly motivated to use technology to learn and build on knowledge. That's one part. The second part, I think, is teachers. I think teachers is a huge element, and will continue to be a huge element. How do we think of those teachers and how we change the way they operate or collectively to be and act more as mentors and be and act more as part of a broader system that gets to work with the students in a different type of relationship that is more peer-to-peer. And this sounds like crazy, but it's really that. It's allowing and giving the students the capability for themselves to do, self-learning in partnership with the teacher. So I think the teacher profession will need to evolve. And I think Gates Foundation, for instance, Bill Gates is investing billions of dollars, specifically in teachers, for one reason. There is where you can define how the motivation can be changed or can be incented at the student level. So that would be the second piece. With that goes things in the policy making, like what's the quality of those teachers and how you think of the teacher profession in the country. I was making this morning the example of in Singapore, if you want to be a teacher, you have to finish basically in the top 10% of your class. Otherwise, you cannot be a teacher. If you look at the $2 Singaporean dollar bill, they have 5 denominations. In the $2 denomination, what are you finding there? A teacher really right at the center of that bill. So what I'm talking about is, it is a combination of things, and technology can actually enable all these things. And then last but not least is really using technology to prepare these students to the new challenges of the world. And there are 2 components on that. One is collaboration. You gotta work in a world where you get and source knowledge from many, many fronts. The ability to talk between peers and networks, locally and externally, it is essential. And the other one, again, those digital networks being enabled to make actually learning more social. That's going to be one of those things. Last week, we released a new version of our search engine. Well, I think we got ahead of Google somehow on that one, in which you get the search engine, but the search engine is connected with Facebook. So when you search for something, your group or your network of people can actually give you recommendations of what you're searching for. The potential there is huge. In a sense, changing the game on how you actually create motivation and do things. So there's no perfect answers, but definitely I think it is overly diagnosed, and I think technology can be a tremendous catalyst to answer many, many of these questions, provided that politicians have the political will to also reform policy or do policy making in line with those changes.
Why does an investment banker make more money than a teacher? I'm not sure I know what the answer to that question is, because I think that if you look at the huge value and the importance of the role that teachers play, I really think that there's quite a simple answer to it. I mean, why does Finland virtually always come top of the PISA rankings of best educated people in the world? Which country pays their teachers the highest salaries in the world? It's Finland. So I think that there's quite a simple piece of mathematics to do around investing in teachers, which is absolutely critical. I think there's also something around the type of education that our children receive. And I think that for Europe, there needs to be a proper strategy for stimulating creativity and innovation from the earliest possible age. The idea of sitting down and learning books by memory, which I think still happens in some education systems, and just trying to cram as much possible information into people's heads, rather than teaching our kids to take the information they have, use it creatively, innovate with it, learn to work in teams, work on projects, develop the kind of soft skills which are the only way that Europe's going to build a more innovative and creative economy. And I think the other, maybe at a later stage in the economic, in the education cycle, is really getting business involved. I think there's a real lack of a structured dialogue between schools and business, and you know, if you want kids to be motivated to get a good education, they've got to feel that there's going to be a job at the end of it for them. A job that they have to work for. There shouldn't be anything like a free lunch in this situation, but if you work hard at school and you are dedicated, you should have a chance of getting gainful and meaningful employment at the end of it. And that means that what comes out of our schools needs to be an employable resource.
In this country, education is valuated very high. Guess which profession, what profession is the top on the list of the most appreciated professions by the Poles? Professor at university. That's the top position. And what is the bottom, what is the worst profession, in opinion of Polish people? Who wants to answer this question? Politicians. Unfortunately, the ranking shows that in this country, members of parliament are the worst, considered not really respectful. So this also shows the gap between politics and private sector, between public administration and public and private world, the companies. And this is what this conference is also about. I think maybe it's good we stop at this moment. Any comments or questions from the floor? There is a last chance to say something. Yes, please.
I was just going to pick up. I thought, Stephen, you might have continued your line of thinking in terms of education. I'm from the UK as well. You talked about innovation and creativity. I think the other thing that's missing is in the title of the forum, competitiveness. Competitiveness is not taught in schools or in education. It's actually educated out of our children. And I suspect that has quite a significant impact upon the whole topic of competitiveness. That was all I was going to say.
Any comment on that one?
I'll just make that's a good comment. And I'll tell you one thing we didn't say that we should have said. Has to do with how you create at the earliest stages the urge for entrepreneurship. Is a very important thing. I think the world is full of good ideas. Many, many good ideas that have happened in many countries and all that. But very few were taken from thinking innovatively, being educated, and turn it into a real new business model that created actually new businesses that could actually escalate in massive ways the number of potential jobs and the number of people that get employed to those ideas. So I'll say, and I agree with you, the problem with education sometimes that we think of it basically in the four walls of a classroom. we'll connect it back with the fact that eventually you have a path for employability and you want to do that. But I'll tell you, coming out of the crisis is going to be a combination of educational systems that think through on how you help from the earliest ages how to build new businesses. I think small and medium businesses are going to be absolutely crucial for Europe to get out of the crisis. That's why things like cloud computing, and we can talk more about that, tomorrow we'll talk about that, will enable cloud computing, will enable that capability to create new businesses, to small companies or even non-created companies to turn into big businesses. So I'll say yes, I'll say more than competitiveness and innovation, which you need to think about in your curriculum, I'll say, how do we teach people to have the urge to create new businesses? It's perhaps our fastest path to creating, the largest amount of jobs, because in the end it's going to be all about that. Is how do we train students not only to get a good job, but to be job creators themselves. And you only do that, I think, to entrepreneurship and the idea of doing that. Even the United States, I think it's short in entrepreneurship. They have very good ideas, but very few ideas come to alive as a Microsoft, Facebook, Google, or many others that came out of very small businesses that had that incentive. So that connection between education and entrepreneurship, I think, is very important to think through as part of the model.
I do think that there's a tendency in the society of the 21st century, and perhaps mainly in Western Europe, which is where I know best, to become very averse to risk. There's a kind of health and safety agenda. The kids aren't allowed to climb trees anymore. They're not allowed to just kind of go out and do the risky type of things that kids have to do to learn what risk means. And I think that taking risks is at the heart of entrepreneurship. So if we take that sense of competition in teams, there are the idea of winners and losers. If there's too much kind of political correctness, we will suck the entrepreneurship and risk-taking instincts out of young people. And so I would support everything that Orlando said, and also our colleague there. That I think the idea of maybe we need a curriculum on how to understand and take risks and see the benefit of taking risk, because that's at the heart of entrepreneurship.